1 Samuel chapter 14, Jonathan's daring valor. One day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man carrying his armor, "Come, let's cross over to the Philistines' garrison that's on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Now Saul was sitting on the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree that is in Migron, and the troops with him were about 600 men. Ahijah, son of Ahitub, the brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the Kohen of Adonai, and Shiloh was wearing an ephod. But the troops did not know that Jonathan was gone. Between the crossings by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and another rocky crag on the other side. One was called Bozez and the other Saneh. The one crag was to the north near Michmas and the other to the south near Gibeah. Then Jonathan said to the young man carrying his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of those uncircumcised ones. Perhaps Adonai will work for us, for nothing restrains Adonai from delivering, whether by many or by few." His armor-bearer answered him, "Do whatever is in your heart. Go ahead, I'm with you, whatever your heart decides." Like me with you. Then Jonathan said, "We'll cross over to the men, then let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait till we come to you,' then we'll stand still in our place, and will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for Adonai has delivered them into our hand, and that will be our sign." So they both let themselves be seen by the Philistine garrison. "Look, some Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they were hiding." The Philistine said, so the men of the garrison shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, saying, "Come up to us, and we'll teach you a lesson." Then Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Follow me, for Adonai has handed them over to Israel." So Jonathan climbed up on his hands and his feet with his armor-bearer behind him. Then they fell before Jonathan, his armor-bearer behind him, finishing them off. That first assault that Jonathan and his armor-bearer made struck down about 20 men within about half a furrow in an acre of land. Terror then spread through the camp in the field and among all the troops, even in the outposts, and the raiders also trembled. When the earth quaked, it was a trembling from God. Now Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin saw the throng scattering away in every direction. So Saul said to the people who were with him, "Call the roll now, and see who went from us." When they called the roll, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. So Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God here." For the ark of God at that time was with Bani Israel. But while Saul was talking to the Kohen, the commotion in the Philistine camp kept increasing. So Saul said to the Kohen, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all the people with him rallied and rushed to the battle. Behold, every man's sword was against his fellow in utter confusion. Now there were Hebrews who had defected to the Philistines previously, and had got up with them to their camp around about. Even they joined the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. Also, when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines had fled, they also chased after them in the battle. So Adonai delivered Israel that day. The battle spread as far as Bethaven. Saul's rash vow. Now the men of Israel were hard-pressed that day, for Saul put the people under oath, saying, "Cursed be the man that eats any food before evening, until I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. But when all the people of the land entered the forest, there was honey on the ground. When the people entered the forest, indeed there was a flow of honey, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard when his father made the people swear the oath, so he put out to the end of the staff that was in his hand, and dipped it in the honeycomb, put his hand in his mouth, and kept his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers told him, "Your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man that eats the foods today.' But the troops are exhausted." Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the people. Just look how my eyes have brightened because they tasted a little of this honey. How much more, if only the troops had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found? Wouldn't the slaughter among the Philistines have then been greater?" That day they struck down the Philistines from Michmas to Aijalon, though the people were so weary. Then the people rushed greedily upon the plunder, took sheep, oxen, and calves, butchered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Then they reported to Saul, saying, "Behold, the people are sinning against Adonai by eating with the blood." "You have acted faithlessly," he said. "Roll a great stone toward me at once." And Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people, and tell them, each one of you bring me his ox or his sheep, and butcher them here, and eat. Don't sin against Adonai by eating with the blood." So all the people each brought his ox with him that night and butchered it there. And Saul built an altar to Adonai. It was the first altar that he built to Adonai. Then Saul said, "Let's go down after the Philistines night by night and plunder them until the morning light. We won't have any survivors among them." "Do whatever seems good in your eyes," they replied. Then the Kohen said, "Let us draw near to God here." So Saul inquired of God, "Should I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. Then Saul said, "Draw near here, all you chiefs of the people, investigate and see how this sin was committed today. For as Adonai, Israel's deliverer, lives, even if it was by my son Jonathan, he will surely die." But not one among all the people answered him. So he said to all Israel, "You stand on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will stand on the other side. Do what seems good in your eyes," said to the people to Saul. So Saul said to Adonai, "God of Israel, grant a perfect lot." Jonathan and Saul were chosen, but the people were cleared. Then Saul said, "Cast the lots between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you've done." Jonathan told him, saying, "I certainly did taste a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand. Here I am, I must die. May God so do to me and even more." Saul said, "You must surely die, Jonathan." But the people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die? It was he who brought about this great deliverance in Israel. Far be it. As Adonai lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul broke off, pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own country. After Saul secured his kingship over Israel, he waged war against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, and the king of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he punished them. He did so with valor, defeating the Amalekites and delivering Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. The names of his two daughters were the name of the firstborn Merab, the name of the younger Michal. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was Saul's father, and Abner's father was Ner, son of Abiel. Now there was bitter war against the Philistines all the days of Saul. So whenever Saul saw any mighty man or any son of valor, he would gather to himself. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Saul spares Agag of Amalek. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Adonai sent me to anoint you as king over all his people, over Israel. Now therefore listen to the voice of the words of Adonai. Thus say, Adonai Zavat, I remember what Amalek did to Israel, and he set himself against on the way while he was coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike down Amalek and put all he has under the ban of destruction, so have no pity on him, but kill both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and sheep, camels and donkeys." So Saul summoned the troops and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah. Saul advanced to the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. Then Saul said to the Kenites, "Go and depart, get down from among the Amalekites, or else I may destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all Bani Israel when they came up from Egypt." So the Kenites withdrew from among the Amalekites. And Saul struck down the Amalekites from Havilah until you come to Shur, which is close to Egypt. He captured King Agag of Amalek alive and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and his people spared Agag as well as the best of the sheep, the cattle, even the fatlings and the lambs, and all that was good, since they were not willing to utterly destroy them. Everything that was worthless and feeble they destroyed completely. Then the word of Adonai came to Samuel, saying, "I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned his back from following me and has not carried out my commands." So Samuel was troubled and cried out to Adonai all night long. Then Samuel rose early into the morning to confront Saul, but it was reported to Samuel, saying, "Saul went to Carmel for some reason. He erected a monument for himself." Then he turned and went down to Gilgal. Now when Samuel reached Saul, Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of Adonai, I have carried out Adonai's command." But Samuel said, "Then what is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen that I hear?" "They brought them from the Amalekites," Saul replied, "for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to Adonai your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed." "Stop," Samuel said to Saul. "Let me tell you what Adonai said to me last night." "Say on," he said. Then Samuel said, "Isn't it true, though, that you were insignificant in your own eyes, that you were made head of the tribes of Israel? Adonai anointed you king over Israel. Then Adonai sent you on a mission and said, 'Go and utterly destroy the Amalekites, the sinners, and wage war against them until you annihilate them.' Then why did you not obey the voice of Adonai, but rush greedily into the spoil, doing what was evil in Adonai's eyes?" "But I did obey the voice of Adonai," Saul said to Samuel. "I went on the mission on which Adonai sent me, and brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the best of what was under the ban of destruction, to sacrifice to Adonai your God in Gilgal. Samuel said, Does Adonai delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Adonai? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, to pay heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and stubbornness is like iniquity and idolatry. Since you have rejected Adonai's word, he has also rejected you as king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed against the word of Adonai and your words, because I have feared the people and listened to their voice. So now, please pardon my sin and return with me, that I may worship Adonai. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of Adonai, and Adonai has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned about to go, Saul seized the edge of his robe and tore it. Then Samuel said to him, Adonai has torn the kingship over Israel from you today, and has given it to your neighbor, who is better than you. Moreover, the eternal glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind. For he is not a human, and that he should change his mind. Then Saul said, I have sinned, but please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me until I bow and worship to Adonai your God. So Samuel returned after Saul, and Saul bowed and worshipped to Adonai. Then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, the king of Amalek. Agag approached him in chains, thinking, Surely bitter death is turned back. Then Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. Then Samuel cut Agag into pieces before Adonai in Gilgal. Samuel then went to Ramah, while Saul went up to his house in Gibeah of Saul. Samuel never did see Saul again until the day of his death. Yet Samuel mourned over Saul, while Adonai regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Samuel anoints David. Now Adonai said to Samuel, How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected for myself a king among his sons. But Samuel replied, How can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me. Adonai said, Take a heifer with you, and say, I have come to sacrifice to Adonai. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will let you know what you are to do. You will anoint for me whom I tell you. So Samuel did what Adonai said, and went to Bethlehem. The elders of the town came out to meet him, trembling, and asked, Do you come in shalom? In shalom, he said, I have come to sacrifice to Adonai. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. He also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Upon their arrival, they saw Eliab and thought, Surely Adonai's anointed one is before him. But Adonai said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I have already refused him. For he does not see a man as a man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but Adonai looks into the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. But he said, Neither has Adonai chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass, and again he said, Neither has Adonai chosen this one. Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, Adonai has not chosen any of these. Then Samuel asked Jesse, Are these all the boys you have? Well, they're still the youngest, he replied, but right now he's tending the sheep. Send and bring him, Samuel said to Jesse, for we will not sit down until he comes here. So he sent word and had him come. Now he was a ruddy-cheeked, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. Then Adonai said, Arise, anoint him, for this is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. From that day on, the Ruach Adonai came mightily upon David. Then Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. David sues Saul's torment. Now the Ruach Adonai had departed from Saul, and the evil spirit from Adonai terrified him. So Saul's courtiers said to them, Behold, now an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your courtiers in your service to search for a man who is a skillful player on the harp. Then whenever the evil spirit from God comes to you, he will play with his instrument, and you will feel better. So Saul said to his courtiers, Find me someone who can play well, and bring him to me. One of the young men answered and said, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing music. He is a mighty man of valor, a warrior, a prudent in speech, and a handsome man, and Adonai is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, Send me your son David, who is with the flock. So Jesse took a donkey, loaded it with bread, a bottle of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. Then David came to Saul and became one of his attendants. Saul loved him greatly, so David became his armor-bearer. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, Let David now keep attending me, for he has found favor in my eyes. It came to pass, whenever the Spirit of God came upon Saul, David would take the harp and play it with his hands, so Saul would find relief and feel better as the evil spirit departed from him.